It was about time to check in with you for two reasons. One, to debrief your discussion about the five dysfunctions, and then also kind of set the tone for your work in the strengths-based leadership. As you might remember from a former video, those are two books that I've been using for a period of time now in the MBA class. But more importantly, I do a lot of corporate education, primarily leadership development. And those books are cornerstones to a lot of the work that we do. So we've had a chance to work with a lot and really test it against corporate America, if you will. The five dysfunctions, I was pleased to see that you were able to identify with them. That's one of the reasons that I like it so much, is that we pretty much have all lived those things. The assessments that you did with your work teams, I find that that tended to be very revealing. Some of you said that it was confirmational. In either case, it's very powerful. And I think if you really look at the questions that are part of Lencioni's survey, what you'll actually see are a set of operating principles. That was the first discussion that you guys got into about operating principles, and I didn't give you any guidelines because I wanted to see where you really went with that. And I find that working with groups on operating principles is challenging, difficult, and that's because a true operating principle is one that is behavior-based. If the principle isn't behavior-based, it's going to be very difficult to measure whether or not it's occurring or being broken or what have you. And so one of the ones that we might throw out there, because communication and listening was something that several of you mentioned, is the old Stephen Covey principle: seek first to understand, then to be understood. And by watching each other interact, I think it would be very obvious whether we were living by that principle, or in fact, or instead, that we were making sure that we were being heard to the exclusion of others. And so again, that's a behavior that has a lot of value because it's a trust builder. And if we remember Lencioni's dysfunctions, that's certainly an important part of the whole thing. That's why it's foundational in his model. And so that it's something that we can hold each other accountable for. Accountability is one of the dysfunctions that tended to pop up a lot in your discussions about your work teams, and the fact that it was somewhat less than present. I was encouraged that communication showed up a lot, and that's actually a very wide and a very deep topic. But understanding that is important, and the work of leaders is to communicate often, to communicate well, but most importantly, to communicate in a fashion that the hearers can embrace and understand. I liked I guess the second discussion question, there were a few terms that came up that I hadn't heard before, and I wanted to throw that out there. One of you talked about the gremlin concept. That's actually a mythical creature that goes back to the aircraft in the Second World War. But gremlins are always pushing on things and creating some unrest. And as we know from Lencioni's book, unrest in the form of good, productive intellectual conflict is a good thing. So having a few gremlins in the group, you might even designate gremlins from meeting to meeting. Devil's advocate might be another term. Someone also mentioned conflict miner. Good, productive conflict is as valuable as gold in moving the agenda of the organization forward, and in giving people, everybody in the team, the opportunity to weigh in and to feel valued. While we're talking about teams, and this is something that became obvious in how you were evaluating your work groups, I'm not going to get into a lot of depth, but in organizational behavior courses, we usually spend some time talking about the difference between groups and teams. They are not the same. One of the things that really distinguishes teams is that you have collective goals. For example, in your discussions, when you think about the posting, replying, reflecting process that we have in our discussions, the only way that you can end up in your in the reflection piece, especially, to be productive, is to count on the feedback of others. And it's no accident that I require you to refer to at least two of your team members specifically by name and by contribution that makes that work product something that you must collaborate on. In other words, we depend on each other to end up with the most productive discussion experience that we can have. That's a team characteristic. It seems to me that some of the organizational units that you spoke of were actually groups. You work very independently. You don't rely on each other for output, for how you get measured. There's always a component, I would suggest, in terms of how, because at some point everybody tends to collaborate. And so again, the Lencioni dysfunctions and that assessment is still applies to any work group, I would suggest, but of course is very foundational to the work of a team. So if you think about this and reflect on it and decide that your work unit really is a group, that's okay. Depending on the work and how it's evaluated and how it's split up, that's completely okay. Let me mention one of the other things, and that is the importance of reflection, depending on your personality type. If you have a personality type like mine, we tend to ready, fire, aim is kind of our approach to work. And I learned through my graduate work that the importance of actually taking the time to reflect on the experience, on feedback, how we feel about it, and what we'll do differently. There are whole things, and you'll see that in the reflection that you're going to do for your midterm exam. Just wanted to mention the importance of reflection. Again, taking time out to really try to make meaning of what's been going on is very important. Something I learned a little late in my career, but I did manage to get my arms around it. Strength-based leadership, just a few words on that, and I'll let you go. Very powerful. It's backed by the research of the Gallup organization. I use a couple of other tools from Gallup, and I appreciate the fact that so much research goes into it. And but again, like the 5 dysfunctions, it explains a lot about how we feel about work and how others perform. I found it when I took the Strengths Finder some years ago. I found it to be incredibly liberating. It really did explain why I like doing certain kinds of work, why other kinds of work, even though I might do it well, might tend to be emotionally draining. Whereas when I got a chance to work in my strengths, it was emotionally energizing. So it doesn't mean that if there's a part of your job that's not in your strengths, doesn't mean you can't do it well. It's just something that takes a little bit more out of you, and something that maybe you'd prefer not to spend your time at. But we don't necessarily, that's not always our call. So I would ask you to really, really spend some quality time in the first week understanding your strengths, your profile, and ask you to kind of consider as you go into the discussion, what does that look like at work? Strategic, ideation, learner, all 5 of my strengths are in the strategic domain. You'll see that there are the 4 domains of leadership. I am the poster child for Mr. Unwell-Rounded. But when I do work in those areas, and I feel very energized, and so I found over time to seek work and seek positions or to modify the expectations of me to take advantage of those. And as leaders, being able to do that for the folks that we're responsible for is very important. And Gallup in their book talks an awful lot about that. So I'll let you to spend some time on that. As you assess your team, your discussion group in the 4 domains, it'll be interesting to see where that leads you and what you make of that. Very powerful. Gallup also talks about the 4 things that followers like to see in leaders or depend on in leaders. And you'll notice that your profile, your leadership profile, 14 or 15 page profile, really gets into that and actually gives you behaviors based on your strengths that you can practice to help your folks feel that you're meeting those 4 needs. There are a couple of other interesting things in there, and I'll let you to dig through that. Very rich. We're not spending only a couple of weeks on it. We could probably spend a whole semester on it. But I'll be looking forward to seeing your discussions. Continue to stay as focused as you are. You did a great job, a superb job in the first round, and work with your group. And I would task you this time around, because we are now minors of conflict, to challenge each other when it's appropriate. That's very rich and deep learning, is when we can ask somebody to explain or challenge them on the conclusions that they draw. It gives us something to reflect on, makes it all the more powerful. So keep up the good work. You guys are really off to a fast start, and I appreciate your effort.